So we've got a very exciting topic for you all today. This is the first of what I hope is going to be many Viz debates. We've got 3 really exciting topics for our new Zen Masters to debate. They've taken very hard stances one way or another on the topics that we'll be presenting and discussing today. So, getting things started. Our first round that we are going to discuss today is simple versus complex visualizations. So, passing it on over to our new Zen Master, Ann Jackson.
All right. Perhaps the most well-known data visualization of all time, Menard's depiction of the Russian campaign, Napoleon's great disaster. Can anyone tell me what this means? What can you discern from this at a glance? It takes me more than 30 seconds. Let me describe it for you. So right here, we've got the start of 3 different sets of troops. And as we go throughout time, which is denoted down here, what you're seeing is that they continue to advance towards Moscow, that they're dying. Anytime we go to black, they've gone on a retreat path. You're seeing numbers along this line to kind of denote how things are going. It gets really specific. When I looked on the Wikipedia page, it was like something like 10,000 min per centimeter or millimeter of page. And then you're also seeing down here the temperature associated with each of these sort of historic points along the path. This is complex. This is hard to read. This is, again, a great display of information, very visually stunning. Once I describe it to you, you get it, right? You can see it. I can say, look at how many men they started with. Look what happened as they went across and they marched through Moscow. Look at what happened when they actually made it back. There's nothing here. Where did everyone go? And again, more context with the temperature. But I argue here that this is hard to read and hard to get insights from, right? When we talk about data visualization, the objective is to take your data, take that information, take those numbers, and abstract them into some sort of pictorial depiction. If I were to ask you, roughly how many men did they start with and end with? It's not a question you can easily answer. Now you can. Simple. Here's the start. Here's the finish. Advancing, and then the retreating. Simple helps you answer the question that you have. When I think about data visualizations, I like to think there's typically a primary question we're going after, and then maybe a secondary. Here I think you kind of get that feel. My primary question is, how many men did we lose? And when did we kind of lose them? How did that sort of drop of soldiers happen along the way? And I can make this even more simple, right? I could boil it down to a number. That's how many was lost. Before, after. Simple is a great approach to data visualization. The flip of the coin, or the kind of the secondary, the sister of simple, is also here. Make your data visualizations simple. Remove chart junk, clutter. Start focusing your audience towards the question or the answer that they are on the search for. Take away any sort of complex or overly sophisticated styling and keep it simple. Less is more. There's no clapping.
So, I'm going to go with complex because not all questions have easy answers. So, yes, I agree with Anne. Simple charts are super easy and quick to understand and to read. Almost everyone understands how to read a bar chart, and you can understand or read it very quickly. But just because some charts don't require a lot of effort, does that mean all charts shouldn't require a lot of effort? And designing for the least effort, are we kind of training consumers to expect to not put in any effort into understanding and kind of consuming the information? And are we expecting them to just always expect easy answers? So I kind of think about it as the difference between skimming and reading very thoroughly and deeply. There's definitely times when you need to just skim, when skimming is a necessity because you don't have that much time. But there are also times when, like this beautiful visualization from my data bestie over here, when you do
Very simple.
You should actually, it's actually a necessity to engage more with the visualization and read it deeply. So I think as data viz practitioners, our goal should be a clear and easy to understand picture, but not at the expense of an accurate and complete picture. So I'm going to quote the same great guy, Tufte. He spent most of his career preaching the data ink ratio, like reducing the data ink ratio and making things as simple as possible, basically removing anything unnecessary, irrelevant, whether it's the data that we're showing or the ink that we're using to show it. But when he criticized, a few years ago, he criticized the data presentation that was created by scientists to argue against launching the Challenger space shuttle. And he made the argument that the scientists included a lot of irrelevant charts as well as information on, or chart junk. And this is what he suggested. But unfortunately, his suggestion oversimplifies it and actually doesn't quite get all of the science around it. And so it ends up being a good example of when kind of following the simplicity doctrine can go too far, and then you end up missing information and even providing a misleading picture, because what he is showing here is actually kind of communicating a causal relationship where there isn't really a direct causal relationship. So another great example of a situation where it can have really grave consequences to oversimplify things is our latest election. So you can see over on the left side, the thing that most papers and blogs did was just show the overall average of the national polling, and that definitely oversimplified it. It's very easy and quick to read, but it gave a misleading or not complete picture. Over here, Nate's Over's 538 blog did a much better job of incorporating some of the volatility and uncertainty around those top-level poll numbers. And then, I don't know how closely you guys all watch this, but all of our favorite chart, of course, is the Great Needle. But as maybe emotionally scarring as it is to see this again, it actually shows, it's, you know, it might take a little more time to get used to understanding how to read this, but it shows a more complete picture than just the overall average poll number. So ultimately, why we need to use complex visualizations is to make sure that we're creating data presentations that provide a clear and complete picture.
Well, that was definitely a very exciting first round. As you can see, there's definitely times where you want to simplify visualizations, but you want to be cautious of not oversimplifying visualizations. So, kind of leading us into our next topic, we are going to debate narrative versus analytical visualizations. So again, passing it over to yet another Zen master, back on over to Layla.
I think that the most powerful and memorable data vizes out there are ones that tell a story. Basically, Numbers are hard to remember, but a really great story is hard to forget. So one of my favorites is called The Depth of the Problem. It was done by the Washington Post, and it was about the airline that went down a little while ago, the Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. So basically, if the story was how far down they had to go to actually look for the remains. So if you want the exact number, it was 15,000 feet down. But what does that number mean? Like, how can you really show in a way that resonates with what people know how far down that really is? So I'm just showing part of it because it's a very, very long viz. But in this viz, basically they accomplish this by making the readers scroll down and down and down. And as you're scrolling down, you see some familiar kind of reference objects. So you see here this is the Washington Monument, and you see the Empire State Building, and you're also getting those reference lines that every few thousand feet tell you how far down you've scrolled, basically, until you get to the very bottom. I would say it's like at least 10, maybe 15 kind of screens. In the very bottom, they give you that final big number. So if I take that away, what do you remember now? Is it that big, huge number, or is it kind of how far down you've had to scroll down and all those famous tall buildings that you had to scroll by? So maybe right now you remember the number, but what are you going to remember tomorrow? What are you going to remember a week from now or a month from now? So one thing to keep in mind is data stories are not exactly like stories in other medium. I think you can go down a wrong path by trying to force a hero or any kind of character. But there are a lot of elements and structures from storytelling that you can use very easily in data stories. So for example, you could take the classic 3-act structure and you can turn it into a problem, a quest for the answer, and then the third act is you're finding that answer that saves the world. And then, so basically what I think about it is the data story is a visual plus the narrative. And the narrative can take visual form, but it can also be annotations or anything else. So this is an example from my own work of a little light on the screen, can't see it that well. But basically, I used the Tableau story points, and in the first image over there, it's the overall chart. Then, as I'm kind of walking through the story, I use highlighting on the 2 charts, as well as annotations at the top to kind of lay out and walk the reader through the argument that I'm making. Something else that should be in there. Oh, there it is. Reappeared. Okay, so Kendall Haven has written a couple of books about how the human brain is wired for story. And basically, he goes through and explains how it's easier for us to remember stories exactly because our brains are so used to thinking in terms of beginning, middle, and end. So even though you might not have a classic plot, your argument can always have a beginning, middle, and end. And if you structure your data visualizations using that kind of structure, it's going to, just by the very nature of how our brains work, it's going to make it easier for you to make visualizations that people remember for a long time and also share with others.
Thank you. Okay, so narrative versus analytical. So here's a quote from Alberto Cairo, who is a well-known data journalist. And when you ask him for a definition of what is data visualization, he would say, a data visualization is a display of data designed to enable analysis, exploration, and discovery. So this is probably another famous example of data storytelling gone wrong or right. In this scenario, data has been set up and the headline's pretty leading, right? The takeaway here is simple. Someone has used data as sort of supporting arguments. There's charts around this, but the story's at the top. It's been simplified for you. There's not been an opportunity for you to explore the data, to come to your own conclusions. And what's interesting about this is you could reimagine this in the positive. Same data, flip it. Red versus blue. Move the charts around and you've got a different story. That's where the problem is. Narratives or data storytelling or stories in general don't give you that opportunity. Going back again to this concept of, understanding, there's someone else that's pretty famous in the data visualization world is Andy Kirk, and he would kind of say that there's 3 levels of understanding, or 3 stages. There's perceiving, interpreting, and comprehending. He would also say that, our role as those sort of data communicators, those visualists, is to sit here, to help with the perceiving and interpreting, and give the audience that opportunity to interpret the rest and comprehend. We thought through what that meant. Perceiving is, what does it show? How do things compare? What relationships exist? Setting up an analytical display so that your audience can answer those questions. Set up a comparison, show them that comparison, and let them draw their own conclusion, their own stories. And then interpreting. Now that that comparative is set up, is it good or bad? Do I even care about it? Is that what I expected? This is analytical in nature. We're not telling you, we're not forcing upon you anything, right? So when you get to this comprehending stage, you've come to your own conclusions. You take away those stories that are impactful and powerful and relevant to you. You then drive those actions. You take that information and you act on it. When you over-engineer data into a story, there's an opportunity to get it wrong and to force things that may not be there. There's not always a hero in your data. There's not always an interesting story. Setting it up analytically gives you, as the audience member, that opportunity to determine what that story is and then to go share it. Okay.
All right, getting ready for our 3rd and final round, kind of constructing dashboards, taking all of what we had already discussed and kind of compiling it together. Do we tile dashboards? Do we float dashboards? This one's definitely going to be an interesting topic. Back on over to Ann.
All right. So this one I'm going to keep pretty simple. So I love this one because we kind of went pretty abstract in the first 2, but this is totally related to Tableau. When you build a dashboard, do you tile it or do you float it? I've got 3 examples, and they're all tiled. Exhibit A, right? Look at this. I mean, we're comfortable with this in terms of how we read. This is a rectangle, 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 rectangle. It's all a rectangle. It's laid out in a very structured pattern, and it's organized so it's easy to read, right? We like this. This is what tiling in Tableau allows you to do. You drag that sheet on, it fills up a rectangle or maybe a square. You drag another one on, and you get another rectangle. It's really easy to start building out the framework, which is a great way to think about tiling, for how you're going to display that information. Here's another one. Different layout. Rectangle, 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 rectangle. Look at it. Because it's tiled, because it's in this structured format, it's really easy for us to even segment out information into different areas, right? We have geographic data here. We have more detailed information, more summary information in the top. It's all well contained in a tiled format. I haven't just randomly thrown something on a dashboard and just placed it everywhere. There's a lot of intention behind what's done here, right? Someone went through the effort of putting it in this way and putting it in this format so that an end consumer could interact with it, could understand it, to take things away with it. And here's my last example. This one's probably on the edge in terms of what it is, but there's still an amount of tiling that goes on here. Even though you have this element in the upper right, which maybe is floating on its own, if you look at the overarching theme of how this is laid out, it's very tiled and structured in format. You've got a header, you've got a top, you've got a little bit of a middle here, then you've got the majority of the information, and then again, another rectangle down at the bottom. The thing I want to impart on you about tiling in Tableau as well is it's the best way to start building a dashboard and building out a framework. You will eliminate headache in your life by going that route. If you want to share insights quickly, if you want to stay in that flow of analysis, drag on rectangle, 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 and then share. It's that easy.
So I am going to suggest you float all of the things, okay? So I think that if you're creating putting together a quick analysis, yes, tiling is your friend. You can get things on there very quickly and get them to align mostly well. Don't have that much control though. But if you want to make something that is more of data art, if you want to make something that, if you're building dashboards in a business context and you need to make sure that it is going to be easy to learn how to use as well as to use for a variety of business users who are used to probably using websites with all of those design conventions. I suggest floating, but especially using your the layout containers to create kind of zones so that your layout containers are floating, but you can kind of have everything kind of inside of those and move things around pretty easily. And the reason why I suggest that is, floating is just going to give you a lot more flexibility, and even the things inside those floating containers will be able to control the pixels of their width and height, where you can't do that at all with tiling. And also, I think that, so I come from a design background, and I can attest to this, learning to kind of set your dashboards up as zones really makes you start thinking in terms of modular grid design, and that is really going to lead to much cleaner, more balanced designs. So my biggest argument though is this is my Tableau public profile, or at least the top third of it, and everything except for one that was used really for just showing I had to set up some worksheet actions, is tiled. And a lot of them, not to brag too much, are Viz's of the day. Like this one, the Rise and Fall of the movie franchise, they're small here, so you can't see it that much. But that's not, even if some of these I could work real hard to make them tiled, but that one, also the one next to it, the life of a hashtag, it would not be possible to do tiled. And I think it shows off some really unique designs. It's not, your classic, boxes, rectangles all across the board. And so I would urge you all to be like the cool kids and be on Team Flow.
Those are three very interesting topics. I think what it really goes to show is that we all really know how to utilize Tableau, but there really is not a one-size-fits-all. Depending on the use case, depending on your audience, is really going to change how you develop and deliver the dashboard to the end user. So we've got a little bit of time, so I'm going to kind of open it up for some questions, whether you've got any hard stances on some of the topics that we debated, or kind of want to challenge some of our Zen masters. So, any questions, anything from the audience? Yes?
So if you start off with one, say you start off with floating, can you easily convert it to tile, or the other way around, or do you have to start fresh?
I wouldn't say easy. I think you could probably easier to go, tile to float, because you could just basically take each of your things that are tiled and make them float.
And I would kind of say, I mean, I was being pretty antagonistic, but one thing Layla has a very valid argument in terms of if you want pixel perfect or precision, or if there's something that you need to do that float is capable of that tiling isn't. So a lot of times, like, I would build out in tile, and then if you get to the point where it has to be that super pristine thing, use your tile as that template, and then go float away, butterfly. Light versus dark backgrounds. Oh.
So I'll say there is
It's a good debate.
There's the science bit is that design for use. If you think I work in an organization where majority of the time they're looking at dashboards on projectors, and so for presentations as well as dashboards, a dark background is actually better, even though it's kind of against what you get taught when you first learn to design PowerPoint. I think there's some situations where it's nicer depending on your color scheme. So these are more, obviously on the art and kind of journalism side of things. For a business dashboard, it could be different. If I do a light background, I always usually do a slightly off-white, because I think white does look very like default. But I would also say that what I have learned over the past year is never to actually use completely black. It actually looks really nice that one on the very left top, the hashtag one, is actually like a slightly purplish black. And so what I've been doing is like I look at the primary color I have, and I do a black and even grays that are slightly in that tone family. It makes it look extra sharp.
Yeah, it's funny because I do a lot of my own personal design work with a light background, but it's never white. I'd say inside the four walls of business, it typically starts as white. I would always love to do like a light gray or something, but anything I'm doing in my personal portfolio, it's actually very similar to what Layla has described, where you use elements of whatever the primary color palette's going to be, and that becomes the background. And what I've heard and what I've read is that when you have sort of a light background, that can wash out some of those more intense colors and give you the opportunity to use it. And that's something that I like to do. And I think Layla and I are very similar in this run. Color helps to make the data shine, so I think we both really like to use color. And so there's good approaches to both. I personally like white, or light for some reason. I can't get behind black. It's too strong for me. It reminds me too much of like Pac-Man. But I have black vises out there.
Any other questions? Yes.
When you're doing floating design like this, how much storyboarding do you do before you decide?
Oh, like wireframing?
So I used to be, this is one of the questions we actually thought of asking. I used to be at the school of thought that coming up, learning just design outside of data viz design, that you should always sketch, it's not a high fidelity sketch, but sketch ahead of time before you're going a tool, because otherwise the tool kind of impacts how you're doing your design. Now I'd say I do a little data exploration and figure out what is the story I want to tell, and then kind of do so. For some things, most things I do I sketch what the different content areas are, and then I go and design it in the tool. I will say in both kind of BI roles that I've had, I've developed a template, like a dashboard template workbook, and that has like different configurations of the same dimensions, but different configuration of those layout containers. And I think in a business environment, you don't need to, have as much like crazy. It's more of a structured rectangles, like Anne said. So it's very easy to have kind of like all those layout containers already all set up, and you just drop visitors into them.
Yeah, so I actually don't do a lot of wireframing. My background is from like a pure analyst. So I am very much like, I want to do as much exploratory data analysis inside of Tableau. I want to profile all my data. I want to understand what is there. I want to build out the chart or the visualization that's best going to display it. And then I want to put it on the dashboard. And part of what it means when I put it on the dashboard is I don't know going into it how important whatever that setup for discovery is. if it should be something small or something large. So I'm not a big person to sketch. I do think what Layla said in terms of like, I'll sketch out maybe the components that we need to hit, right? Like, okay, we need to have something that's geographic based. We need to have a little bit more detail. But I don't like going further and drawing out what specific visualization is going to be used, because I feel like at that point I am over engineering what the data should be telling you as the end user.
Any other questions? Yes.
All your answers reference the business world, but are you guys normally given requirements prior to understanding your data, or are you given free range?
Well, I'll start with this one. Yes, I laugh at the term requirements, because requirements is never the truth. It's never what you need to actually build what you want. So I always go in with like a sense of what the requirements are. I like to have conversations with people like, what are you trying to figure out? What is your problem? What were you using this for in the past, right? What does this number mean to you? If I show you this number, what are you going to go do with that number? I try to drive the conversation as much towards that as possible. And I think that that's true for both of us, and what makes us pretty successful in this world is not stopping at the requirements, because at that point, it's I go back to kind of what I said before, that's an over-engineering of what the data is even trying to communicate, right? You're not giving it that opportunity. So yeah, there's requirements. I'd say filter requirements, they drive me batty, but those are the only ones that I'm like, fine, let's just get it out of the way. Tell me how many quick filters you need so I can just cry about it and move on. But beyond that, I like to really press back to clients or end users and say, give me that opportunity to help display this in the light that's best appropriate for your use case.
So I will disagree and say filter requirements are like the number one requirement that I will almost always push back on, just because I really just I think people ask for it because they don't know what else they can use to accomplish the same things, but with more information. So my design background is user experience design, so I'm very comfortable getting a list of requirements and kind of deciphering what is the underlying information need. And it's even better if you can actually be part of that conversation and kind of have it be a conversation and back and forth and kind of understanding, well, why do you want this, and kind of like phrasing back whatever, if they say they want filters, being able to phrase it back in a way that's like, oh, so if I'm understanding you, what you're really looking for is to be able to do X. And so I think there are definitely situations, especially in the business environment, where you are faced with a list of requirements. So I think it's useful to be able to kind of push back and work with that. But I also think that having some time as an analyst lets you maybe push that even further and kind of get to maybe find some insights in the data that the person didn't even ask for in their requirements. And a lot of times I'll do like a secondary dashboard, so you show them the first one, and then you say, well, but look at what else you could see.
Look at the
if
better
you
one.
look at it this way.
No, look at what you should be
little
using.
tactics, yeah.
All right, I think we got time for one more question. Let's go ahead.
Speaking as someone who's kind of new and very green at Tableau, what's the hatred of filters?
So I think for me, I think a lot of times when people ask for filters, it's like 20 filters, like a whole sidebar of filters, and that will slow down your dashboard a lot. But I think for me, it feels like it comes out of not being willing to make a decision of what's most important, right? You're like, well, the user might want to slice by this and this and this and this. And a lot of times, say they want to look at it by department, it would be more, you would pack more information, that data and ratio, right? If you did it as like a little mini bar chart, and so the user could see right away just by glancing at it, what are the departments that have the most of X, but they can also still use that as a filter. So a lot of times, those are really more they can provide more kind of insight value for users. But of course, you can't fit like 20 of them. So
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. When people say they want a lot of filters, it reminds me of the old way of doing things where you're just trying to use this dashboard or this like report generator as a calculator to get a number. That's not what visual analytics is about. It's about setting up the view. It's about you being able to compare and contrast things, about being able to drill in a little bit further. The more filters you have, the more static your analysis is. That's pretty much what it boils down to. And it also demonstrates to me that that person is not necessarily ready for visual analytics, and there's a separate conversation that needs to happen. And that's where I go back to, well, what are you trying to do here? What are you going to do when you just get this number? If you only need the number, why are we even here? Why are we having this conversation? And usually that evolves into, well, because we need to move forward, we need to change. And like, okay, so we need to change, right? Let's show you what it looks like when you do change.
It's an excellent approach.
All right, well, let's give both of our debaters a big round of applause. I appreciate all the questions and everything. I think it was very valuable. I think we're going to go ahead and do a little 10-15 minute break